So it is 11 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us over Zoom. My name is Julia. I'm the program specialist here at the History of Diving Museum. And today we are having author Gary Pinkerton give us a presentation on Paper Diver, how the world's greatest underwater treasure hunter never got wet. I'm really interested to hear from Gary and about his research into this man. So, thanks to everyone for joining us virtually. I'm coming to you from Islamorada, Florida, where our museum is located. And Gary is joining us from Texas. I'm going to let him go ahead and take it away. And if you have any questions for him, just put them in the chat. We'll get to those at the end. So go right ahead, Gary.
Julia, thanks very much. I'm really happy to be able to talk about Harry Rieseberg. You're in Florida. I'm in Texas. I see my friend Charles Daniel from Canada, who's worked on some of this project with me. It's nice to see people from all over joining us here. I learned about Harry Rieseberg somewhat accidentally doing a book about an East Texas treasure legend. And when I Googled his name, because that's what you do, I learned that he had written about himself surviving an attack by a giant octopus while recovering sunken treasure, killing a 15-foot shark with only his diving knife, enduring a hurricane, and a severely broken leg while at sea. Any one of these tales back in the 40s and 50s, when he was actively writing, would have enthralled the public at that point, if only they were true. Paper Diver is a biography of Harry Rieseberg, a shameless self-promoter who passed himself off as the world's greatest treasure salver. Despite the often obvious evidence of his lies and fabrication, his books influenced a generation of legitimate divers. And that's the tale I want to tell you today. You would think that in 1935, at age 43, a person who'd just been fired from his job at the Department of Commerce and had seen his wife and two children move to Oklahoma would be somewhat distraught and desperate. You would think it would be a low point in his life. Instead, Harry Rieseberg saw that as an opportunity to act on a dream that he had held for a couple of years. His dream was to recover billions and treasure at the bottom of the sea, or at least get paid to tell others how to find that treasure. Rieseberg had worked for years in the Bureau of Navigation. That was part of the Department of Commerce in Washington, D.C. He was born there in 1792. Excuse me, 1892. He was in charge of documenting all U.S. vessels historically and in the present, tabulating their details in rows and columns. I'm pretty sure he would have loved Excel. Around 1931 or 32, while he was working there, he had a life-changing epiphany. He suddenly realized that he had access to archival information about the approximate location of ships that had gone down with potential riches in their holds. All he needed to do was to find a way to get to it. So he turned himself into an expert on treasure. In the years prior to 1935, which was, you'll see in the book, is a pivotal year for him, he was quite notable locally in D.C. He had an article written about him in the Post calling him a joiner. He was a member of dozens of social clubs, mostly Masonic related, with impossible for him to participate, but he was there. Federal employees organized by states, and one year had a parade. He led the Arizona contingent where he had lived temporarily working for the health service. He led that parade while dressed in cowboy regalia. One of the clubs that he was a member of was the Ku Klux Klan. He was the local head of the local clavern there and participated actively in some of their rallies and cross burnings. He also parlayed his growing knowledge of shipwrecks into articles like this two-page article in the Washington Post Sunday magazine in October of 1933. On January 7th, 34, Lieutenant Harry Rieseberg, now in byline, formerly of the Quartermaster Reserve Corps, and now he's reporting himself as a treasure expert. He had two major articles published in major newspapers on the same day. The Los Angeles Times published Go Down to the Sea for Gold, and the Washington Post ran Mystery Ships Add Exciting Chapter to Lore of the Sea. Before 1935, he had never called himself a diver or a salvor or even hinted that he had gone below the surface. Instead, he was a maps expert. He wanted to parlay his knowledge about these potential shipwrecks to people who could find those with their equipment. After he was fired from his job, this diving robot is why he seemed unaffected by his current troubles. Rieseberg had worked near the patent office and he had put them on alert a few years earlier to let him know when any underwater grappling devices like this showed up. And they did. During that time, before 1935, Rieseberg had also met Gene Nold, a pioneering engineer and diver people may be familiar with. And that conversation about Nold's adventures further cemented Rieseberg's dreams. That diving robot was built by a very interesting man, Eugene Romano, a Seattle inventor. He had um, he had built this Romano mobile. It had actually won one of the Pikes Peak races. He also built, um, excuse me, he also built this airplane. I think it was like 1911, 1912. They called it the Flying Bedpost based on that wireframe. So a brilliant guy. Um, Rieseberg tried to reach out to Romano in Seattle, but he had unfortunately died only a couple months before that. So Rieseberg instead connected with Ralph Fleming, who was Romano's son-in-law, and they arranged for the diving bell to be transported from Seattle to Washington, D.C. For Harry's grand plan to attract investors, he needed a way to get to the treasure he had convinced that he had mapped. This is where another part of Harry's plan rather serendipitously evolved. This four-masted schooner, the Constellation from Boothbay, Maine, was docked at Water Street on the Potomac in D.C. The Constellation was taking on partygoers and serving as a restaurant. Robert Royal, who was the owner from Boothbay, had fully restored this beautiful ship there in Maine and was doing everything he could to finance its existence. With the arrival of the Constellation, Rieseberg believed that his dream had suddenly crystallized. He had a romantic ship to go to sea, a diving bell with claws to haul up treasure, and the maps he had created from all his late nights in the archive. Even though this unpowered ship had no way to stop precisely over one of Harry's X's on his maps, and the diving bell had no propulsion, it just hung straight down off the edge of the ship. For Harry, this was the solution. And so this was his ultimate goal. This was his dream. And it had to be because there was no plan B for Rieseberg at this point. He had no job. His family was gone. He was living with his parents, and any money he had was being spent on this venture. So Royal on the left there, Rieseberg in the back, and Fleming on the right formed a company that hoped to find investors for an underwater treasure search. Rieseberg carefully guarded his maps. His contract indicated that if he couldn't go, then his maps wouldn't go. So in mid-1935, they arranged for the diving bell to be placed on the Constellation for a shipside demonstration. That's Fleming in the bell and Rieseberg standing there shaking his hand. Fleming was vigorously trying to sell the Romano diving bell to the federal government, the U.S. Navy, and of any country. Royal just wanted to keep his precious ship afloat, and Harry just wanted to be wealthy and famous, if not from treasure, then from investors. Anybody who's done research will appreciate how I felt when I first found this newsreel showing the diving bell.
rowboat of the deep is tested at Washington. Designed for salvage operations a mile below the surface, this diving bell manipulates its claw-like fingers with almost human skill. It has a lifting power of 1,000 pounds, but also can pick up coins as small as a quarter. However, it has yet to demonstrate whether or not it can make change. All set for the first dive. With an operator inside, the bell descends to see what treasure science can wrest from the placid Potomac. A strike, and the deep-sea fortune hunter comes up with a fish dinner.
That fish was planted in the hooks, by the way. I mentioned my friend Charles Daniel. He's recreated the Romano diving bell in 3D using his CAD skills, which are magnificent. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned for Harry Rieseberg. He badly broke his leg on the deck of the Constellation while it was docked. He later made up stories about how he broke his leg after being violently tossed down into the cargo hold of the ship while surviving a hurricane at sea. He had to have some explanation for his lifelong limp that followed. But he ignored the severity of his injury because, as I said, there was no plan B. He had to make this work. So his leg began to heal out of place. His parents drove him around the country looking for a doctor. And then, strangely enough, he ended up in Galveston, where his ex-wife had become a nurse and was able to get some care there. The Romano Bell and the Constellation moved around from port to port after that, trying to still drum up support for investors for a treasure cruise. Mostly they were parked offering tours and hoping for the best. The Constellation was later sold multiple times and eventually ended up sinking on a shoal in the Bahamas. Any serious divers will probably know about the Constellation and what a diveable wreck it still is. It also became a focal point for Peter Benchley's follow-up to Jaws in the movie The Deep. So in the hospital, Rieseberg was distraught. He described in one of his books how depressed he was and without hope. And then he realized that he still had those maps. He still had his research. And he describes the experience as being reborn after 18 months in Galveston. Part of that time, his parents, and his ex-wife and two children lived together in a home. But Harry was undaunted. He had his charm. He was very charming, compelling stories, and an unending determination to sell his stories to the movie industry. So he and his family, he and his parents moved to LA. He also had an unwavering commitment to making stuff up, and Hollywood's the great place to do that. So from 1937 till 1942, when he published his first book, I Dive for Treasure, Harry worked at various writing articles, trying things out in the movie industry, making contacts, really trying to drum up support and not having a whole lot of success other than with his magazine articles. In LA, a neighbor of his was named Eric Strutt, who was a scriptwriter for radio shows. So Rieseberg had the general idea for his, quote, life story and his diving exploits, and he paid Strutt $150 for a manuscript for the book. They each published numerous articles with different bylines with the same story about diving on Port Royal, a sunken city. John Gainfort, his agent, wrote to the publisher after receiving that manuscript that the manuscript submitted was not in saleable form. It's very polite. So they had to have the entire manuscript rewritten before it could be sold. Now, keep in mind, Rieseberg is basically telling stories to Eric Strutt, who's writing that script. After hearing about the book and a subsequent film, Strutt had written to Rieseberg's agent, said to share their problem being Lieutenant Harry E. Rieseberg. And so he wrote a very lengthy letter about how Rieseberg had double-crossed him and not paid him, and various complaints that ended up in a later lawsuit. Before the book came out, there were actually 4 different ghostwriters that the agent and publisher hired to complete this book. It's amazing. All of this is documented in archives of the agent and the publisher. It's incredible stuff. One of those ghostwriters actually plagiarized himself in a story about another shark and octopus fight from another diving book. Back in those days, not virtually impossible to find, but these days it shows up in a search. So Harry Rieseberg was incredibly narcissistic and self-focused, and there's just evidence of that throughout his entire life. But I think the epitome of that, how he saw himself and his self-importance, is this letter he wrote to his publisher after the book had been submitted, before it was published in 1942, and 10 days after Pearl Harbor. So Rieseberg wants to know what happened. Did the Japanese blitzkrieg scare the publishers of the book? Did World War II beginning and people dying slow down my book? He, in fact, thought that people would be more interested in the book because some of his treasure stories have to deal with the Pacific. That's just an incredible statement there, and really the pinnacle of expression of how focused he was on himself, his needs, his goals, and what he intended to do. He had a wholly self-centered existence. And that didn't start when he became an adult. This is a picture of Harry at age 18, uh, uh, taking a job at the Smithsonian. Those quarter units there are very well-known pieces of furniture at the Smithsonian. But at the Smithsonian, he described himself as boiling birds, preparing them for taxidermy. He had other various jobs because, junior clerks. But while he was there, he was caught stealing a very rare and valuable issue of a journal about, of all things, birds' eggs. The police actually knocked on his door, but the Smithsonian chose not to press charges since it was recovered. He also claimed in I Die for Treasure that his father, a German immigrant who served at Fort Reno in Oklahoma in the cavalry, had appeared with Buffalo Bill Cody in his touring Wild West shows. Harry also claimed that a future vice president drove a hackney for his parents when they were recording in Oklahoma, but neither of those were true. One of his biggest whoppers is that while he was at the Smithsonian, he had met through a church, he had met President Teddy Roosevelt on in the White House. Harry's story is that Teddy took note of young Harry and requested him by name to accompany him on a year-long safari that took place after Roosevelt's term ended. The dates and facts don't even bear the slightest scrutiny, but it certainly made him sound just inherently adventurous in his opening chapters of I Dive. The star of the Harry Rieseberg show was most often a giant octopus, occasionally a shark thrown in for interest, but usually it was fighting an octopus. So he was fascinated with these things, and dozens and dozens and dozens of articles he published supposedly depicting himself here with a blowtorch, cutting the tentacles off of an octopus that attacked this other diving bell, while supposedly a different diving bell, the Romano bell, had a camera filming the whole episode, which was quite well lit. This is actually a scene from a 1930 movie called Below the Sea. Fay Wray was trapped inside this diving bell under attack by the octopus. You can find that movie on YouTube, and it's pretty entertaining. But the octopus was king. Even in his articles, this one article on the right is the first one I found when I learned Rieseberg's name. One of the great things about magazines back in the 40s and 50s and even into the 60s, where it's that there were some incredible illustrators working out there, and so these beautifully illustrated drawings uh, populate his articles. I was fortunate to make contact with Dave Crooks, who worked for Mel Fisher on the Atocha. And Mel has been Dave has been collecting books since 1975. His copy of I Dive for Treasure shows one of Harry's claims. He repeatedly claimed to have found this shipwreck or another and either hauled in a minimal amount of funny or been chased off by a shark or an octopus or a hurricane. But in the inscription for this book, Harry said that he had partially salvaged the Central America wreck in 1934 while he was working at the Department of Commerce. Uh, and Dave notes that this wreck wasn't even located until 1988, and it was about a mile deep. So people wondered about Harry's veracity when during that time. This is a letter from William Beebe, who set depth records in his diving bell, written to Carl Levitt Hubbs. Hubbs was at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and was a defender of cephalopods, and did not like how Rieseberg treated octopi in his books. So he made multiple attempts to discredit Harry's treatment. Incredibly persistent Hubbs was. But Beebe told, a native truth is that people like to be fooled, and at the end said, "Yeah, he's not truthful, but it's such good reading." So after the magazine articles really started to hit, this is how we saw Harry Rieseberg in connection to his diving adventures. He had about 8 different themes to his article, and he's literally sold them thousands of times. I've documented almost 1,800 publications where his work appeared. But Harry told his agent that that was his business, to crank out about as many articles as he could, not care a lot about how much he got paid. He was always hinting at, there's just another expedition waiting to go, and here's the diving bell, and here's the ship, even though it was not there anymore. So this is what we saw of Rieseberg's diving adventures. A hidden face, a helmeted diver being pulled up over the side of a ship. That green typewriter ribbon is one of Harry's trademarks. All of his manuscripts were in green. Makes it easy to verify. And then these 2 photos were just laughable. These pre-Photoshop paste-up jobs. Look, it looks like the same photo in 2 different settings, with the interior of Harry's helmet very well lit, apparently, showing his face in the shadows. But people bought it because it was such great reading. One reviewer of one of his books, the Los Angeles Times, kind of quietly hedged his bet, saying that the tales were stirring, and as so far as this reviewer is informed, entirely truthful. I don't really know, but it's been said it's entirely truthful. Another reviewer for a different book said that Lieutenant Rieseberg, thrilled to death to be in the know, catalogs various cargoes of treasure which he believes to be lying at the bottom of American coastal waters. He's made no move to furnish documentation for his statements, and I have a feeling he would be offended if we asked for it. That perception turned out to be true. I spoke to Lee Spence about his phone call with Rieseberg, and Spence said that he was trying to tell Harry that even though he knew that his stories were made up, that he really appreciated Rieseberg for writing them and getting him into diving. Harry hung up on him. But Rieseberg did have influence on real divers, and these are documented in their own accounts. Robert Sténuit, a French diver, Robert Marx, who dove Port Royal and debunked some of Harry's stories. John Potter credited his interest in diving to a paperback of Rieseberg's he found on a magazine rack. And Lee Spence, that I mentioned before. Marx made a couple of comments like this, that Rieseberg was such a fraud. All his wrecks were intact. They had treasure chests with an octopus on top and a skeleton guarding the whole thing. It was junk, but I fell for it. And as young boys reading these stories, it intrigued that wanderlust in them and that they pursued. So in the book, I talk about Harry's rules. He wrote endlessly to his agent, making a lot of complaints and threats and lawsuits. He wrote personally, revealing aspects of his character that you would normally get to see in a research project like this. But one of his rules he made as a statement when he was asked to do a book tour was he never did anything that he wasn't interested in or he cared to put himself out for. Shortly after that, he was convinced to do a book tour and gave credit to the agent who convinced him of that because of his rule number one. He's standing there. This is probably about 1943. You can see Harry there. He's very tall. He's quite handsome. He's very charming. He's very intelligent. And he wanted to promote himself. He was in LA at this time, so his end goal was to end up with a movie. This is a copy of my bookshelf showing various issues of his books. You can see some of them published in multiple languages. The little small red books at the bottom there were published during the World War II for troops. Just a lot of publications, a lot of books, some of it repetitive. He even did a reprint of I Die for Treasure in 1970, the year he died, mostly as a way for his wife to continue earning some small royalties. So he finally, with much persistence and a lot of connections and a lot of help and tenacity, he finally got one of his stories adapted into a script for this movie, City Beneath the Sea. You can see Robert Ryan there, very angry. Anthony Quinn and Susan Ball in a somewhat loving engagement, which carried over outside the film as well. Here's a press photo of Quinn and Mala Powers and Harry on the set of City Beneath the Sea. That map there that Harry's pointing out, he used classifieds ads to sell for $1. So with stories, this is a magazine article that became adapted. There were three different screenwriters before the movie ended up being assigned to Bud Bedecker. Back in these days, the studios cranked out movies right and left, and Bedecker would finish one movie on a Friday and start another on Monday. And he said he told his secretary at page 102, he put the script down. He said, "My God, it's terrible. At the rate things are going, I'm prepared to bet that on page 125, there'll be a giant squid." He admitted he was wrong, that it was actually on page 127. So even Bedecker, had little admiration for the story. Nevertheless, it cranked out itself into a movie. These splashy world premieres in various large theaters. I think this is either Detroit or LA. I'm not certain. But this is back when people wore ties and suits to go to the movies and nice low heels. Here's a shot of one of the premieres in the Grenada Theater in Kansas City. I actually got this from the son of the man who took this photo. Largely early 20s white males. White, of course, this is 1953. Segregation fully in effect. And just a very few bored people back there in the back. The New York Times said the movie was about as banal and uninspired as they come. The total enterprise, including a fairly ambitious finale, underwater earthquake with a giant octopus, gives the impression of having been slung together during lunchtime. So Harry's movie did sell. It did well. It was in Technicolor, which is an early technology with that. He got some nice royalty checks out of that. And as he said in one letter, he didn't have to eat hamburgers for a few months. He was able to do better. It also inspired a suit from Eric Strutt, who claimed that Rieseberg had stolen his story. So after the movie, Rieseberg kind of settled into a life of producing magazine articles, and there were no shortage of outlets for those articles at all. But he also revealed, part of his character again in a one of his blistering emails to his agent. The agent actually asked him to apologize, and Harry said he's never had a reason to make an apology to anyone. I guess that included his ex-wife and children. And he didn't intend at this late date to begin the habit. He just wasn't in his nature to apologize. So, being in LA, he had access to model makers, and he had someone model up this what they called underwater tank. There were lots of newspaper articles about it, and this is as far as it went. It was never quite clear how it would be powered. And the way I view mechanical devices is the more moving parts there are, the more opportunities there are for something to break. On the right, he promoted for a time the construction of these dynamic uh, giant tongs that would basically go down to the bottom on cables and just grapple and pick up a huge ship and bring it up to the surface. You can see the Romano diving bell in the illustration there with lights on it, but unless that crane above moves, that diving bell is not going anywhere. True to his business plan, his articles appeared in what were called girly magazines at the time, a lot of military and He-Man magazines. And he also sent the same articles to the Catholic Boy Together magazine for Methodist families and the Catholic Digest. He didn't care what the magazine was as long as they accepted his story. And he, in rule number 3, he falsely claimed that he had done these dives and repeatedly in books and magazine articles, and he said he had no regrets about anything that had taken place to pursue that goal. So the whole nature of treasure hunting is a huge gamble. Mel Fisher aside, a lot of people like to uh, want to find that treasure chest at the bottom of the sea, particularly back then. Particularly after the Depression, people were looking for get-rich schemes, and Harry found, a market in some ways for at least the attention, if not the funds. So Carl Clausen, who was the first marine archaeologist for the state of Texas in 1973, said this: "Take all your money, put about $200,000, pile it up on the front of the boat, and then grab a beer and drive away." Because that way you can waste all your money without the miserable hard work involved in a treasure hunt, and the return will be exactly the same. There was one Wall Street Journal article that the basic theme of it was there was more money to be made by people selling treasure maps and metal detectors than there was to be made by people who might find some treasure. So regardless of how many saw through his tall tales, Harry persisted. Um, Only a few months before he died in 1970, he was still defending his falsehoods to magazine editors who questioned some of his stories. His original publisher had asked for samples of things that he had maybe brought up from the bottom, and Harry explained how he'd either given them away or they had some other disposition. One French diver who visited his home in Paradise, California, asked him about that as well, and Harry had nothing to show. He had no coins, no jewels, no anything that connected him to an actual treasure dive. All he had was this persistent claim that he was the greatest living underwater treasure diver, and one of the reviewers of his book picked up on that. Any man who can unself-consciously refer to himself as the greatest living anything sounds like a good guy to stay away from. For me, it was a great guy to write a book about, and that's what Paper Diver is about in Harry Rieseberg. Before we get to questions, I will let you know that I would appreciate your book orders. Uh, you can certainly get it through Amazon, but supporting authors and purchasing through my website is the best way to support this kind of work. If you use the code free ship as your checkout, I'll pay the shipping, so it'll be just like you picked it up in person. I appreciate your attention and I'll look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Gary. I'm going to give people time to type questions in the chat there if they have them. But I have a question. I see a lot, just doing research here at the museum and, selling merchandise, that very distinct depiction of the octopus fighting the diver. So was that common in pop culture before Harry, or did he kind of help bring that into popular imagery with
I
his
think it
stories?
existed before. I mean, that 1930 Below the Sea movie with Fay Ray featured that octopus. And, even more so than sharks, it seemed fearsome to people. It was all those tentacles and the suckers. And yeah, a shark will bite you, but that octopus will envelop you and kill you slowly. And there were other, um, John Craig was an underwater photographer more than a diver. And he had one film called Killers of the Sea that he basically said they just shot some underwater footage and they clipped it together. They put it in a movie theater and they paid attention to what people clapped for. And then they recut the movie and they put it back out. He actually had a giant sea turtle chewing through the line, the air hose of an underwater diver. But it was always back to the octopus. That was just that fearsome image that it presented.
My other question was you showed that magazine, I think it was Popular Mechanics, with the crane kind of grabbing a shipwreck from
Yeah.
the bottom. Do you know what year that was from?
I would hazard a guess to say 55, 56, but I can let you know for sure. Do you have a interest in that article or more of it?
Well, no, I
Or you
was
just
mostly wondering because it's very similar in design to something the CIA used in 1960 to salvage a Soviet submarine. So it was a
yes.
giant crane with a moon bay in a ship, and they salvaged a submarine from I think it was 16,000 feet
Yeah.
using that crane kind of.
Who was the guy? I forget the name of the guy that was involved in that. But yeah, I ran
Howard
across that.
Hughes.
Yes, Howard Hughes.
Yep.
I did run across that as well. And the multi-millions that were spent on that device is a little underrepresented in Harry's uh, wash photo.
Okay. So I was just wondering, I guess, was that kind of a common concept, or was there
I
something?
didn't run across it other than that example and this one that you gave. You know, people were very inventive, and the patent office was full of other underwater grappling devices and diving bells. Um, there was there was one that was actually Harry actually considered before settling on the Romano, but people wanted to find the easiest way to get down and use those pinchers to claw into the side of a wooden pirate ship and pull out a chest. That was always the glamorous side of it. Practically, and Robert Marx pointed this out in one of his books, most of the treasure wrecks are, under 40 feet. So the idea of a sunken ship, a mile down, was kind of far-fetched. Finding
Right.
it certainly was.
And a lot of these, I mean, these wooden ships from like the 1700s, I mean, they're all rotted away most of the time, especially if
Right.
they're in warmer waters. I mean, here in the Keys, we got thousands of wrecks, and the only thing left is stones. And that would have been
Right.
true even in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, in Harry's books, he actually published a chart because he was the tabulating guy, the Excel guy. He published charts about naming wrecks, what year. He had data that he put in the index of his book just to entice people to develop more interest and build up their idea that they might be able to find something.
And were those real? Was that real data that he was showing?
They
Or
were
just.
They were real wrecks. There were names of real wrecks, but the data he provided was so non-specific that it really couldn't be acted on. Robert Marx even admitted buying one of Harry's maps, and he said he found that most of them didn't exist and were completely made up.
So just bogus maps that he was selling for,
A whole dollar.
wow. Oh, that would have been a lot of money back then, right?
I don't know. Dollar, I think, is still a dollar. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Well,
But
thank
yeah,
you again for this presentation. I think I don't see any questions in the chat here, but if anyone does have them, I'm going to put this video on YouTube. And if you have any questions or you would like to share this presentation with more people, it's going to be available on our YouTube channel. And at the History of Diving Museum, we do have a talk on the 18th. That's going to be about German U-boats in the Keys. So be sure to tune in for that next presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined us here on Zoom. Thank you to those in the library currently watching you. And you have anything else to add, Gary? I think.
no, I appreciate it. I would hope to see you guys buying a book for yourself and letting others people know about it.
All right. Well, thanks so much and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.